Episode number 2. I am going to break down Games Workshop 2 in such detail as you have never seen in your life. Now, from the last video, I got a lot of positive feedback, but I had some requests for doing more of the deployment styles on these individual maps. And so we're going to do that. So buckle in. I'm going to talk about deployment on GW2. And after this video, you're going to know how to freaking deploy and you're going to know how to profit from your expertise. So let's get right into it. All my happy members. All right, so Games Workshop 2. But what I did is I took the liberty of drawing some lines of sight on this particular map. You see all these squiggles. I'm going to explain them. It's going to be a lot simpler than what it looks like. I promise you that. First thing we always do whenever we look at any map, and yes, this is on Hammer and Anvil, and I will do it on other deployments as well. You look at the obvious staging points. Like, where do your troops want to move? Well, I can guarantee you on this map, we want to move here. This is where we want to move. So this is what I would identify as a staging point. We talked about staging points on the GW1 as well, most notably the big V in the middle of the battlefield. This is clearly a staging point. From this location, you can extend your influence on most of the entire map. So from here, you can get to the center. From here, if you're embarked, you can get like a 9-inch move to at least threaten this objective. And you can get like a 9-inch move to at least threaten this objective. Now, if you have your jump pack infantry, you move 12. It's much easier to get over here. It's much easier to get over here. But you're also threatening all these firing lanes. So this is a staging point. Now, there's another pretty obvious staging point on this map, and that's right here. This would also be considered our natural expansion, meaning this is the objective that you can generally safely control if you deploy on this side of the map. If you deploy on the red side of the map here, let me just flip the camera. Then this would be the natural expansion for you, because this is the expansion that you're naturally going to be able to hold. The reason why this is safe is because you can't be shot while you're holding this objective. Once again, if we flip back to the blue side, this is where your natural expansion would be, because you cannot be shot, because people can't draw lines of sight through these ruins. Got it. Okay, so we already know this is where we want to go, and we know this is where we want to go. We know that we can kind of stand over here, but this is not really safe for us, because the second we walk up this lane, we're in a firing lane. But at least they can't shoot us from across the map because this ruin's going to be in the way. So we can assault here, but it's not really safe to assault there, right? So our safe places to stand are here and here. That's going to define our entire deployment. Now, Hammer and Anvil, Games Workshop 2. Let's get into it. I'm going to run a generic orc army. I've got units in all these trucks. This is not a list review video, so I'm not going to go through the list here. I'm just going to you can just kind of see stuff. We got like Breakaboys and Take Bustas, these Snagas, whatever, all these things. All right, so first thing you always want to do is you want to deploy your transports, because transports typically are going to be the things that are the hardest to move. Kind of like in the previous video when I was saying, hey, if you have a hard to move object, let's say, for example, like a Land Raider, you got to see where can your Land Raider actually move. So a Land Raider on this map can actually move up this flank. Well, it can't move through this wall, so it's impossible for it to go further here. So if you're going to deploy it, you got to recognize, okay, that's as far as it's going. Or if you're trying to go on this side of your board, this is probably a pretty stupid place to deploy it, because it ain't going any further than this. That's as far as it's going. You can't move through a wall with it. So you got to understand that if you're going to run something like a Land Raider on this map, it basically has to deploy here, because this is the only place where it can safely stand. See how it's standing outside of these squiggly lines? That means your opponent can't see it easily. So if they want to see the Land Raider Redeemer, they would have to try to draw that angle from here, but this is not really a firing lane, because there's nowhere for them to stand. They kind of just be standing out in the open. Okay, so first things first, you always check where you can actually move with your awkward models. All right, so where can I put these trucks and they are going to be relatively safe? I can't really put it here because your opponent can draw a big firing lane here, but I can easily deploy them here. I can generally fairly easily deploy it here, because there's no way to really see the truck easily from here. Sure, your opponent could always move through this gap, but when you do a measurement here, your average battle tank's movement is 10. So if you move 10 inches, you're still going to be behind this ruin, and you're not going to be wholly within this, meaning the truck is probably pretty safe here. So I could also probably put a truck here, because once again, there's no really good line of sight. Your opponent would have to move all the way up here, and even then, they're still not going to see that truck, which means I can also put another truck right here. Boom. If I was on this side, this is a very easy place to deploy a truck. This truck can then come from here and come up like this. You can, even if you're willing to risk this lane, you can deploy it here. But this is still a little risky, because your opponent, if they wanted to deploy in the line and shoot you with something, they can shoot there. So this is probably the safest place to deploy the truck here. And then this truck is realistically going to deploy here and just try to start advancing up this angle, this side. So that's what you're really going to be looking at. If you guys have ever seen, let's see, these are commandos, I think. Yeah, we got commandos here. So this is going to be my infiltrator squad. So on this map, I legit might just start my infiltrators right here. And I probably don't start on the objective because depending on how fast my opponent is, because if they want to move up and kill these guys, I don't need to give them storm hostile objective or what do you call it, overwhelming force turn 1. So I might actually deploy them like this. But this guarantees that I get onto my natural expansion turn 1 pretty easily. So this is a relatively reasonable place to deploy them. This is also going to be relatively easy, but I think I'd probably end up being a little too close to them, so I don't think that's going to work. Just remember, you don't really want to deploy your infiltrators onto the no man's land objective because you would give up those sweet, sweet secondaries of storm hostile objective and overwhelming force turn 1 if you went second. So not always the best choice. So you always want to try to deploy right off of them. So this is not a terrible place for the commandos to go. They could also easily go here. You could even make an argument for putting them over here if your opponent doesn't have shooting on this side of the board. All right, with that being said, this is basically what your deployment is going to look like. Why is this a good deployment? Well, your deployment is good because if you go second, your opponent cannot shoot you. There's really no line where they can shoot you. Maybe they could fire this angle and kill this guy, which means I got to scoot this nerd a little bit this direction, which means now he's safe. So that's an easy solution. There we go. Now he's safe. And then this guy is going to be safe roughly right about here. And if you have to rotate them, then you got to rotate them. But he can't see me from any of these obvious places. If he wants to see this truck, he's going to have to figure out how to go through here. And that means he's going to have to be faster than normal. Because if you're going a 10-inch movement for your average battle tank, he can't do it. Even with a 12-inch movement, he's going to have to pay a pivot cost, which means he won't be able to move through here. So he's going to need advance and shoot or some crazy, stupid, fast Eldar shenanigan stuff to be able to shoot through that angle. At which point you would have to take appropriate actions. So I'm perfectly well deployed here. If I go first, I'm super happy. I've got units embarked in this truck, so I can just 9-inch disembark to touch the center, get me area denial, extend battle line, secure no man's land, blah, 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 whatever. These guys can come here, get me cleanse, extend battle line, secure no man's land, blah, 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 blah. Likely, I would have to have a unit of Storm Boys somewhere like here, or jump pack infantry to be deployed maybe right in this little pocket here. And this is going to be really important to make sure you deploy them correctly, because if you get a tempting target, it's really nice to be able to go touch this turn 1. Doesn't mean it's necessarily easy, but it's probably the best way we have of getting tempting target over here turn 1. The only other way you could do it is if you wanted to put your infiltrators in this weird little pocket here, which is kind of challenging. But it is a very interesting place for your infiltrators to go. Now, you are obviously wide open for shooting from this entire firing angle. But the cool thing is that if they do want to shoot you from this angle, then depending on what army you're playing, you could shoot them back first, which is actually kind of a cool concept. So this is also, I would say, is a relatively acceptable place to put infiltrators. It just depends on who you're playing and who you're playing against. So maybe not with orcs because you don't really have much firepower, but if you're playing a different army, that could be a very reasonable place to put. So I have the ability to go score basically any single secondary in the entire game that I can control. This is on Hammer and Anvil. Shockingly, it doesn't change very much if we're looking at Tipping Point. Let's go all the way to Tipping Point first. Tipping Point is going to be effectively the same. Big shock. This truck is going to stay right here. This makes it actually a lot easier for me to get this objective, which means on this map, I might have the Storm Boys deployed here. This truck is going to move up to be roughly here. This truck has to fit within our deployment zone to be here. This truck is going to move to be here. These firing lanes are basically exactly the same. They don't particularly change all that much. And that's basically the difference. So a lot of times when you're playing these maps, your deployment will alter things, but not as much as you think. Tipping Point and Hammer and Anvil tend to be very similar. And you're basically doing the exact same things here. Look, I'm in a position to get myself a tempting target, cleanse, area denial, tempting target, cleanse, all of those great shenanigan things. You're in position to do basically everything, all of your secondaries if you go first, and you're in position to not get absolutely blitzed if you go second. Now let's look at one that is significantly different. So this was our tipping point. Let's look at our search and destroy, and then I'll go into the Dawn of War, and then we'll finish up. So search and destroy. This is going to be one of the missions where you're going to get some changes. There will be some things that are different here. Let's delete some of these lines. I'm actually just going to click delete all lines. And then let's analyze what we're working with in this position. On this particular deployment, we've got one of the greatest deployment spots in the entire game in the form of right here. If I put guys in a transport here, if I put a big knight here, if I put a battle tank here, if I put basically anything sitting right here, I am threatening my opponent from my deployment zone. So this is obviously going to be the staging point, because from here, we get to exert our influence on the center. And we can even, depending on how fast we are, exert our influence on our opponent's staging point and our opponent's staging point here. So this is a stage point. Weirdly enough, even though this is inside our own deployment zone, this is also a very good staging point. If this happens to be a battle tank, say you're playing Space Marines or something, you can easily move through here and get great initiations. If you're in a transport and you're playing orcs, you can easily get a 9-inch disembark, or 3 inches for your disembark, plus 6 inches for your base move, to be charging things in his natural expansion, or his natural staging points. You could also easily just move here and do the exact same thing. So now you're threatening here and you're threatening here. So I would call this a staging zone. You've got tons of places in it where you can actually affect your opponent. You don't have to be exposing yourself, and you are absolutely capable of ruining your opponent's day by being able to respond anywhere on this flank from this general position. Once again, we know that we want to move here. And interestingly enough, we are also perfectly safe deploying like this. And I'll show you why. Our opponent would have to cross this point if they want to try any hope of getting any type of line of sight, and they're still not going to get any line of sight. So if your opponent has a Vindicator and they want to move up here and shoot you, guess what? They can't shoot you. Now, one little trick that I do a lot of times is I'll actually do stuff like this, where I will give my opponent that line, depending on what units they have. Because if he wants to put a Vindicator here turn 1 to actually shoot my truck, then I'm probably okay with that, because that means I'm going to turn 1, get someone out of this truck to go kill his Vindicator, which I would take to be a good trade. Now, not all of you are comfortable with things like that, but it's just things that I look at. So I figured I'd throw that little tactical thing in there for you while we're going through the map. So search and destroy, pretty dang simple. I want to stage here. I want to stage here. This is not a staging point. Just kind of like we spoke about in the previous video, this is not a staging point. This is a place where I want to hold this objective, but I don't stage here because I'm not really trying to exert my influence on my opponent's board state from here. If I'm trying to threaten his staging, I'm going to threaten it from my staging. This is where I'm just simply holding from. So you got to figure out how are you going to get units to hold your natural expansion from this position. Load ops are great for this. Fast moving transports are great for this. Sometimes if you have like some fast moving infantry or bikes or whatever, you can get them fast enough up here. But you really, really want to be very cautious when you're holding this perceived natural expansion. So this is a search and destroy. You want to be here, you want to be here, you want to claim these two spots. This allows you to exert your influence on your opponent's board. That's search and destroy. Let's take a look at the Dawn of War and the sweeping engagement versions of this. It doesn't change all that. It changes fairly radically. Let's pretend that we are in the red. One of the super cool things is right here. Boom. I'm very easily threatening this expansion. No problems. I love it. Right here. Boom. I'm very easily threatening this expansion. I can also deploy kind of right here. Always draw your lines just to make sure that you're not missing anything crazy. Right? So you don't want him to easily be able to see you from right here. So don't give him that. But this does allow you to advance your transport. And if you have a fast transport, a lot of times you might even be able to get up in here if you roll like a 6 or a 5 on your advance, depending on how fast your transports are. That's a pretty good place to jump to. Over here, it's actually much harder to deploy because your opponent can always just stick their little turret out from this position so they can draw this line of sight. So you'll have to always be very, very cautious about... Oh, come on. Draw it. There we go. Ah, come on. Help me out here, CTS. There we go. This is This is going to be one of those no-go zones, right? And then we'll just draw some squiggles in here to let you know. Basically, nothing gets to be deployed here for safely, and nothing really gets to be deployed here very safely because once again, if your opponent has a battle tank, they can just move right over and see all of this. So if you're over here and you want to deploy, you're going to have to deploy behind this thing, which sucks. So the majority of your deployment is going to take place roughly like this. So you know you're dominating this flank, and you're going to try to sweep this direction. If you're blue, you're going to dominate on this flank and try to sweep this direction. It's just the way it needs to go. If you have scout moves, if you got scout units, like you could always have put units here, and they can even scout behind this to give themselves a little cover. But of course, this is opening up a huge firing lane on this thing. So just be aware of the points that you want to move. We clearly want to move here. This is a great place to be. And this flank, there's no good staging area. There's just none. So this is generally very, very challenging to assault, just because of how easily your opponent can hide. But you get the same thing on your own flank, right? Your opponent has a very hard time assaulting here. So keep that in mind as you're doing all of your deployments. Let's change it up real quick. We're going to look at sweeping engagement to see how this changes things. And it really doesn't change anything, hardly. You just slightly scoot up here. These guys are basically in the exact same position. And over here, you're still not going to this to this place. Maybe if you have some really fast like jump pack assault units that are hitting here, they can kind of threaten this, but that's about the only change. So guys, we went through tipping point, we went through hammer and anvil, we went through search and destroy, dawn of war, and sweeping engagement. When you're going through these maps, identify where you want to move. We know on this map we always want to be moving here. When we're on this style of deployment, we want to be moving here. When we are on our search and destroy, we always want to be moving here and here. And then lastly, when we're on our tipping point / hammer and anvil, we're always going to be wanting to move here and here. That's just the way of things. So think about where you want to move, how are you going to get there, and use that to dictate your deployment. Draw your lines if you need help to see if they're going to be able to shoot you turn one. Make sure they can't shoot you turn one. Sometimes you can't do anything to avoid allowing them the possibility of shooting you, but you can absolutely bait them into shooting something. So if you give them something to shoot, that could put them into a bad position where you get to shoot them back. So keep that in mind when you're doing deployments. Guys, this was Games Workshop number 2, and we'll be back more in the series with GW 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down below. If there's some things that I missed and you think I should go in a little more detail, let me know down below, and I'll catch you next time. Crop on. Bye-bye.